A struggling artist refused a bribe. The words echoed in Mira Chen's mind as she stared at the blank canvas before her, wondering if her principles were worth the empty refrigerator and the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter. Her cramped studio apartment smelled of turpentine and instant noodles, the windows fogged with condensation from the cheap space heater that barely kept the December chill at bay. Outside, Chicago's winter painted the city in harsh strokes of gray and white, much like the monochrome life Mira had been living for the past 3 years since graduating from art school with honors, but no prospects. 28 years old, and what did she have to show for it? A collection of paintings no gallery would touch, a part-time job as a barista that barely covered rent, and a stubborn belief that her art mattered. The wind howled against her windows as she wrapped her threadbare cardigan tighter around her slender frame. Her fingers were stained with paint, nails bitten to the quick, a nervous habit she'd developed in recent months as rejections piled up like the snow against her building. "One more try," she whispered to herself, the words forming a small cloud in the cold air of her apartment. Just one more. Mira lifted her brush, ignoring the growl of her stomach. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's shift at the grind, where she'd smuggled home a day-old muffin that now seemed like a distant memory. Her phone buzzed, probably her landlord again, wondering about next month's rent. She ignored it, focusing instead on the canvas before her. This painting was different from her usual abstract work. It featured a solitary figure standing at a crossroads, one path gleaming with gold but shrouded in shadow, the other simple but bathed in light. She'd been working on it for weeks, pouring every remaining ounce of hope into its creation. A knock at the door startled her, sending a streak of crimson across the canvas where it didn't belong. "No," she whispered, frantically trying to correct the mistake. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Coming!" Mira called, setting down her brush with trembling hands. She wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors usually meant trouble, bill collectors or the super complaining about the paint smell again. When she opened the door, she found a man in his 60s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent. Silver hair framed a face that looked both kind and calculating, with eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. "Ms. Chen?" he asked, his voice carrying the polished tone of old money. "Yes?" Mira stood awkwardly in the doorway, painfully aware of her paint-splattered jeans and the holes in her socks. "Maxwell Thornton," he said, extending a hand that bore a single gold signet ring. "I'd like to discuss your work." Mira's heart skipped a beat. The name was vaguely familiar. Something about a collector or a gallery owner? She couldn't place it, but it didn't matter. Someone wanted to talk about her art. "Please, come in," she said, suddenly self-conscious about the state of her apartment. She quickly gathered empty coffee cups and sketches from the only chair she owned, offering it to him while she perched on the edge of her unmade bed. Maxwell Thornton surveyed the small space with unreadable eyes, taking in the stacked canvases against the walls, the makeshift easel constructed from salvaged wood, the single hot plate that served as her kitchen. "You've been recommended to me by an associate," he said finally, turning his attention to the painting on her easel. "They said you had integrity, a rare quality these days." Mira followed his gaze to her unfinished Crossroads painting. "Recommended? By whom?" "That's not important right now," Thornton replied, standing to examine the canvas more closely. "What's important is that I'm prepared to offer you an opportunity." He turned to face her, expression serious. "I need a specific piece created, something personal with particular requirements. I'm willing to pay $50,000. The sum hung in the air between them, almost tangible in the small room. $50,000. It would clear her debts, pay her rent for years, buy proper supplies, maybe even fund a small gallery showing of her own work. It was everything she needed. "What kind of piece?" Mira asked, her mouth suddenly dry. Thornton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A recreation of sorts. There's a painting, a Jackson Pollock that was destroyed in a fire 20 years ago. It was never photographed properly, but I have connections who've provided detailed descriptions. I need you to create a new version." The implications sank in slowly, then all at once. "You want a forgery?" "I prefer the term homage," Thornton said smoothly. "No one would ever know. The piece would be for my private collection only." Mira stood up, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "You want me to forge a Pollock?" "I want you to use your considerable talent to recreate a lost masterpiece," he corrected. "And I'm willing to pay handsomely for your discretion." The space heater clicked off, leaving a sudden silence in the apartment. Through the thin walls, Mira could hear her neighbor's television, the canned laughter a stark contrast to the tension in her own room. "I'm not a forger, Mr. Thornton," she said quietly. "Everyone has their price, Ms. Chen. Yours is apparently higher than 50,000. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a checkbook. 100,000 then. Half now, half upon completion." Mira stared at the checkbook, at his manicured hands that had probably never known true hunger or cold or desperation. Her gaze drifted to her crossroads painting, to the figure standing between paths of shadow and light. "I'm afraid you've misunderstood me," she said, lifting her chin. "I'm not saying my price is higher. I'm saying I don't have one, not for this. Everyone has a price," Thornton repeated, writing a check with a fountain pen that gleamed in the weak winter light. $200,000. The amount made her dizzy. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having, enough to change her life completely, enough to never worry about rent again, to buy a proper studio, to focus on her art without the constant anxiety of survival. And all she had to do was compromise everything she believed about art. "Mr. Thornton?" Mira said, moving toward the door. "I appreciate the offer, but my answer is no. Art isn't about recreation or deception. It's about truth, my truth. I can't put my name to a lie no matter how much it pays." Thornton studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he tore the check in half and returned it to his pocket. "A final offer then," he said. $500,000. The sum was astronomical, life-changing. $500,000 could fund her art for a decade or more. It could help her sick mother in Detroit. It could erase every financial worry she'd ever had. Mira's hand trembled on the doorknob. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine saying yes, having financial security, never again having to choose between art supplies and groceries, being able to send her mother to the specialists she needed. Then she looked at her paintings, at years of work created from her soul, each one an honest expression of her vision, her pain, her hope. What would they mean if she compromised now? "I'm sorry," she said, opening the door. "I have to ask you to leave." Thornton didn't move. "You're turning down $500,000 on principle? For what? To keep struggling in obscurity? To protect the integrity of art that no one will ever see?" The words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. What if this was her only chance? What if no one ever did see her work? "Maybe," Mira said softly. "But I'd know. Every time I picked up a brush after that, I'd know I'd sold out everything I believe in. I can't live with that." A strange expression crossed Thornton's face, something like surprise, followed by something else she couldn't identify. He nodded once, then walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at her. "Interesting," was all he said before disappearing down the hallway. Mira closed the door behind him, sliding down against it until she sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? $500,000? Gone. She pressed her palms against her eyes, feeling the pressure of unshed tears. Her phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up, expecting the landlord's number. Instead, it was an unknown caller. "Hello?" she answered, voice thick with emotion. "Is this Mira Chen?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Yes, this is she. My name is Eleanor Wells, from the Thornton Foundation for the Arts. I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected as this year's Thornton Grant recipient." Mira froze. "I'm sorry, what?" "The Thornton Grant?" the woman repeated. "It's awarded annually to an artist who demonstrates exceptional talent and unwavering artistic integrity. The grant includes a $1 million endowment paid over 5 years, a gallery exhibition at our Manhattan space, and a residency at our Chicago studio complex." The room seemed to spin around her. "I don't understand." "I never applied for any grant. The selection process is confidential," Eleanor explained. "Candidates are nominated and evaluated without their knowledge. Mr. Thornton himself makes the final selection." Thornton, the man who had just left her apartment, the man who had offered her a bribe. "This is some kind of joke," Mira said, her voice barely a whisper. "I assure you it's not, Ms. Chen. The foundation would like to arrange a meeting tomorrow to discuss the details. Would 10 a.m. at our downtown office be convenient?" Mira agreed numbly, wrote down the address, and ended the call. She sat motionless on the floor, trying to process what had just happened. Had it all been a test? Had Thornton been evaluating her all along? She crawled to her laptop, searching Maxwell Thornton and Thornton Foundation. The results confirmed what the caller had said. Maxwell Thornton, billionaire art collector and philanthropist, head of the prestigious Thornton Foundation that was known for discovering and supporting emerging artists. The annual Thornton Grant was one of the most coveted awards in the art world, and somehow she had been chosen. Mira looked around her cramped apartment, at the canvases stacked against the walls, at the crossroads painting on her easel. Tears began to flow freely down her face, not tears of relief or joy, though those would come later, but tears of validation. Her principles had been worth something after all. The space heater clicked back on, its warm glow spreading across the room. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent against her window. For the first time in years, Mira felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope? The Thornton Foundation's downtown office occupied the entire top floor of a sleek glass tower overlooking Millennium Park. Mira stood in the lobby, clutching her portfolio case, feeling painfully out of place in her best clothes, which meant her only pair of unworn jeans and a sweater without paint stains. "Ms. Chen?" A young man approached her, offering a warm smile. "I'm Derek, Ms. Wells' assistant. They're expecting you upstairs." The elevator ride to the 47th floor gave Mira a moment to compose herself, though her heart threatened to pound out of her chest. The doors opened to reveal a space that was part office, part gallery, white walls displaying carefully chosen artworks, expansive windows framing the city like living paintings. Eleanor Wells greeted her with a firm handshake. She was a tall woman in her 50s with a geometric silver bob and eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Chen, welcome. Please follow me." As they walked through the gallery space, Mira couldn't help but stare at the artwork on display. Pieces by artists she had studied in school, names that were legendary in the art world, and soon, impossibly, her work would hang alongside theirs. Eleanor led her to a conference room where Maxwell Thornton sat at the head of a long table, along with 3 other people Mira didn't recognize. The same man who had stood in her tiny apartment now looked even more imposing in this environment. "Ms. Chen?" he said, rising to greet her. "Thank you for joining us." Mira found her voice. "Mr. Thornton, I think you owe me an explanation." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Direct? I appreciate that." He gestured for her to sit. "Yes, I do owe you an explanation. The visit to your apartment yesterday was the final stage of our selection process. You offered me a bribe," Mira said, aware of the others watching this exchange with interest. "I presented you with a moral dilemma," he corrected. "The Thornton Grant isn't just about talent, Ms. Chen. It's about character. About what an artist will do when no one is watching, or when they think no one who matters is watching." He nodded to one of the associates, who slid a folder across the table to Mira. Inside were photographs of her works, pieces she'd exhibited in small cafes, student shows, community centers. There were even images of paintings she'd done in college. "We've been following your career for 2 years," Eleanor explained. "Your work first came to our attention through Professor Jenkins at the Art Institute." Jenkins, her favorite instructor, who had encouraged her even when others had dismissed her style as uncommercial. "The final test is always personal," Thornton continued. "I offer each finalist a compromise, a chance to profit quickly by setting aside their artistic principles. In 20 years of conducting this test, approximately 60% accept the offer." "And the other 40%? Mira asked. "Become our grant recipients," he replied simply. "Artists who cannot be bought are increasingly rare, Ms. Chen. Those who choose integrity over immediate gain, even when facing significant hardship, are the ones who will create truly meaningful work over a lifetime." The reality of what had happened, what was happening, began to sink in. "So there was never any Pollock forgery?" "No," Thornton confirmed. "Just a test of character that you passed with remarkable conviction." One of the other associates, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, spoke up. "Your crossroads painting, the one you were working on yesterday, it's quite remarkable. The symbolism wasn't lost on us." Mira felt her cheeks warm. "It's unfinished. I hope you'll complete it," Thornton said. "I'd like to display it at your exhibition." Her exhibition. The words still didn't seem real. For the next hour, they outlined what the grant entailed. Quarterly payments over 5 years totaling $1 million, a fully equipped studio in the Foundation's artist complex, mentorship from established artists, a solo exhibition in New York, inclusion in the Foundation's permanent collection. "We don't just hand you a check, Ms. Chen," Eleanor explained. This is an investment in your development as an artist. We provide resources, connections, and guidance, but your work, your vision, remains entirely your own." By the time they finished, Mira's head was spinning. She signed the necessary documents with trembling hands, still half convinced she would wake up at any moment. As the meeting concluded, Thornton asked her to stay behind. When they were alone, he studied her with those penetrating eyes. "My wife was an artist," he said after a moment. "Not famous but brilliant. She died 15 years ago, but she taught me that true art comes from an uncompromising spirit." He paused. "Yesterday, when you refused even $500,000, I saw something of her in you." Mira didn't know how to respond to the unexpected personal revelation. "The art world will try to change you, Miss Chen," he continued. "Success brings its own temptations. Remember the artist you were in that cold apartment, the one who chose integrity when no one was looking? That's the artist we're investing in." She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Thank you for believing in me. Prove us right," was all he said in response. The first thing Mira did with her initial grant payment was move her mother to Chicago, into a comfortable apartment near the best specialists for her rheumatoid arthritis. The second was to send a massive flower arrangement to Professor Jenkins with a note that simply read, "Thank you for seeing something in me." The third thing she did was weep, alone in her new studio space at the Thornton Artist Complex, surrounded by north-facing windows and more supplies than she'd ever dreamed of owning, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her reality. "Don't waste this," she whispered to herself, wiping away tears. "Make it mean something." The complex housed 12 artists at any given time, each with their own studio space but sharing common areas that encouraged collaboration and community. Mira met painters, sculptors, photographers, and multimedia artists from across the country, all previous Thornton grant recipients at various stages in their careers. Among them was Elijah Winters, a sculptor who had received the grant 4 years earlier. With dark eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled and hands that were always slightly dusty with clay or plaster, he became Mira's first friend in her new life. "The first year is the hardest," he told her one evening as they shared takeout in his studio, surrounded by his abstract stone forms that seemed to capture emotion in solid mass. "Not because of the work, but because of the guilt." "Guilt?" Mira asked, surprised that he had named the exact emotion that had been plaguing her. "Survivor's guilt," Elijah clarified. "You're here, and thousands of other talented artists are still struggling. You got the golden ticket, and part of you wonders why you deserved it when others didn't." Mira set down her chopsticks, struck by the precision of his observation. "How did you handle it?" "By remembering that art isn't a competition. Your success doesn't take away from someone else's potential. And by using your platform to elevate others when you can." He gestured to his latest sculpture, a towering piece of interconnected marble forms rising from a shared base. "We stand on each other's shoulders." Over the following months, Mira threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. The financial security allowed her to take risks she never could have before, exploring new techniques and larger canvases. She completed the Crossroads painting, the figure now clearly stepping toward the path of light, and began a new series exploring moments of moral choice in everyday life. Eleanor Wells visited her studio regularly, offering gentle guidance without attempting to influence her artistic direction. "Your authenticity is what got you here," she reminded Mira. "Don't lose that now that you have an audience." That audience was growing. The Thornton name opened doors that had previously been firmly closed. Gallery owners who had ignored her emails now sought her out. Art critics began mentioning her as one to watch. Social media accounts dedicated to emerging artists featured her work. With success came new challenges. Some critics dismissed her as a foundation darling, without bothering to engage with her actual work. Others tried to categorize her paintings in ways that felt reductive. Collectors began asking her to create pieces that matched existing works, something like the blue Crossroads painting, but in green to match my living room. 6 months after receiving the grant, Mira found herself at a trendy gallery opening in River North, surrounded by the kind of people who had never given her a second glance before. Dressed in a simple black dress that Eleanor had helped her select, she sipped champagne and tried not to feel like an imposter as people discussed her work as if she weren't standing right there. "The use of negative space is clearly derivative of Rothko," said a man in tortoiseshell glasses to his companion, gesturing toward one of Mira's paintings that had recently sold for more than she used to make in a year. "I was actually thinking more of traditional Chinese landscape painting," Mira interjected. The emptiness that isn't really empty. The man turned, surprised to find himself face to face with the artist. "Oh, Ms. Chen, I didn't realize that I was listening." Mira smiled. "Art is meant to be discussed. I just thought I'd add my perspective." Later that evening, as she stood alone by the gallery window watching city lights shimmer on the Chicago River, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Holding up okay?" It was Elijah, looking uncharacteristically formal in a charcoal suit that still couldn't disguise his artist's nature. "I don't know if I'll ever get used to this part," Mira admitted. The social politics, the networking, the performance of being an artist rather than just making art. Elijah leaned against the window beside her. "No one said you had to? Isn't it part of the deal? The foundation wants their investment to succeed. Success means visibility, sales, critical acclaim. The foundation wants you to create meaningful work with integrity," Elijah corrected. "Everything else is secondary. Thornton didn't choose you because you'd be good at cocktail parties." Mira laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Thank goodness for that." "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "Let's get out of here. I know a diner that serves breakfast all night. No art critics allowed." Over pancakes and coffee in a vinyl booth, Mira felt more like herself than she had in months. Elijah listened as she confessed her fears, that success would change her, that she'd lose touch with the raw honesty that had defined her early work, that she'd become one of those artists who created for the market rather than from the heart. "The test doesn't end when you get the grant," she realized, pushing syrup around her plate. "It's ongoing. Every day I have to choose to be the artist who refused the bribe, not the one who got comfortable." Elijah nodded. "That's why Thornton structures the grant the way he does. It's not just about giving you money, it's about giving you time to figure out who you are when you're not struggling to survive." "And who am I?" Mira asked, more to herself than to him. "I can't answer that," Elijah said softly, "but I like who I see so far." Their eyes met across the table and something shifted between them, a recognition, a possibility. Mira looked away first, suddenly aware of her heartbeat. "Your exhibition is in 3 months," Elijah said, mercifully changing the subject. "How's the new series coming?" "The new series? 15 paintings exploring moments of ethical choice, inspired by her experience with Thornton but expanding far beyond it." The centerpiece was a large triptych she'd titled The Test, 3 panels showing the same scene from different perspectives, challenging viewers to consider what they might have done in her place. "It's almost finished," Mira said. "But I'm terrified. What if New York hates it? What if I've been fooling myself all along? What if you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do?" Elijah countered. "What if your voice is the one someone needs to hear?" Outside the diner windows, dawn was breaking over Chicago, painting the sky in the same colors Mira had been using in her latest work, soft pinks and golds bleeding into deep blues. A new day, full of possibilities and choices. "I should get back to work," she said, suddenly eager to return to her studio, to lose herself in paint and canvas and truth. Elijah smiled, recognizing the look in her eyes. "The artist returns." The Thornton Gallery in Manhattan was a converted warehouse in Chelsea, its industrial bones softened by perfect lighting and acoustic treatments. Mira stood in the center of the main space, surrounded by her work, 23 paintings that represented her journey from struggling unknown to recognized artist. Her exhibition, titled Integrity, would open to the public tomorrow night. Tonight was the private preview for collectors, critics, and foundation members. In less than an hour, the space would fill with people who could determine the trajectory of her career. "It's magnificent," Eleanor said, joining her in the gallery after overseeing the final arrangements. "Maxwell is very pleased." "Is he here?" Mira asked, scanning the empty space. "He'll arrive later. He likes to observe the reactions first, before revealing himself as the patron." Eleanor straightened a label beside one of the smaller pieces. "Are you ready for this?" Was she? In the past year, Mira's life had transformed completely. She had financial security, critical recognition, a beautiful studio, her mother nearby and receiving proper care. She had friends among her fellow artists, especially Elijah, whose friendship had evolved into something deeper over shared meals and late-night conversations about art and life. But tonight wasn't about any of that. Tonight was about her work standing on its own merits, without the Thornton name to shield it. "I think so," Mira said finally. "Whatever happens, I know these paintings are honest. They're the best work I've ever done." Eleanor squeezed her arm. "Then you're ready. Go get dressed." Your car will be here in 30 minutes. Back in her hotel room, Mira slipped into the gown she'd chosen for the evening, a simple design in deep crimson that made her feel both elegant and authentic. As she fastened her mother's jade pendant around her neck, her phone chimed with a text from Elijah. "They'll love the work because it's true. But even if they don't, I do. Call me after." The support warmed her. Elijah had wanted to be there tonight, but he was in the final stages of installing a major public sculpture in Seattle. He'd promised to be in New York for the public opening tomorrow. When Mira returned to the gallery, it had transformed. Soft music played from hidden speakers, waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and the space was filling with the art world elite. Eleanor introduced her to collectors, museum curators, and gallery owners, names Mira had only read about in art magazines. Ms. Chen, a distinguished critic from a major art publication, approached her. "Your triptych is extraordinary. The technical skill is impressive, but it's the emotional honesty that strikes me most forcefully." "Thank you," Mira said, fighting the urge to explain or qualify her work. Eleanor had coached her on this. Let the art speak for itself. Don't apologize or over-explain. As the evening progressed, Mira began to relax. The response to her work was overwhelmingly positive. Collectors expressed interest in several pieces, a museum curator discussed a potential acquisition, and even the most critical voices found aspects to praise. She was speaking with a young collector when she spotted Maxwell Thornton enter the gallery. He moved through the space slowly, observing not just the paintings but the reactions of those viewing them. When he finally approached her, his expression was difficult to read. "Mr. Thornton," Mira greeted him. "Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. "Walk with me? I'd like to see the exhibition through your eyes." They moved through the gallery together, Mira explaining her process and intentions for each piece. When they reached the triptych, the centerpiece of the show, Thornton stood before it in silence for a long moment. "You've depicted me," he observed, noting his likeness in the central panel, offering the bribe to a figure whose face was turned away from the viewer. "Yes," Mira acknowledged. "Is that all right? I can have it removed if—" "No," he interrupted. "It's perfect. Honest." He turned to face her fully. "You've exceeded our expectations, Ms. Chen. Not just in talent, but in what you've chosen to say with that talent." Before she could respond, Eleanor approached with urgent news. "The Times critic just left. He's filing his review tonight for tomorrow's paper." "And?" Thornton asked. "He called it a debut of rare integrity and vision," Eleanor reported with a smile. "He specifically mentioned the triptych as a powerful meditation on ethical choice in an increasingly transactional world." The validation should have filled Mira with joy, but instead she felt a strange emptiness. She excused herself and slipped away to a quiet corner of the gallery, needing a moment alone. What was wrong with her? This was everything she had worked for: critical acclaim, financial success, artistic recognition. Yet something felt incomplete. She found herself standing before her Crossroads painting, the one she'd been working on when Thornton first came to her apartment. The figure at the diverging paths now had a definite face, her own. "You chose the right path," a voice said beside her. It was Thornton, who had followed her retreat. "Did I?" Mira asked. "Sometimes I wonder if I've just traded one kind of compromise for another. Everyone wants to define my work, categorize it, own a piece of it. Sometimes I miss that cold apartment where it was just me and the canvas." Thornton considered this. "The struggle changes, but it never ends. Before you fought to survive. Now you fight to remain true to yourself amid success." He gestured to the painting. "That's why this piece resonates. The choice is never made just once." His words crystallized something Mira had been feeling but couldn't articulate. "I'm grateful for everything the foundation has done for me," she said. "But I think I need to find my own way forward from here." To her surprise, Thornton smiled. "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. The grant isn't meant to create dependence, Ms. Chen. It's meant to give artists the freedom to discover their authentic voice. If that means charting your own course beyond our guidance, then we've succeeded." The weight that had been pressing on Mira's chest began to lift. She wasn't rejecting the opportunity she'd been given. She was fulfilling its purpose. "There's something else," she said, gathering her courage. "I want to start a mentorship program for young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, using some of my grant funds to pass on what I've been given." "An excellent idea," Thornton approved. "Eleanor can help you structure it." He checked his watch. "I should return to your guests. This is your night, after all." As he turned to leave, Mira called after him. "Mr. Thornton? Thank you, not just for the money, but for the test. For seeing something in me I didn't even see in myself." He nodded once, then rejoined the crowd, leaving Mira alone with her painting and her thoughts. The exhibition continued around her, glasses clinked, conversations flowed, art was discussed and acquired. But Mira stood quietly before her crossroads, understanding now that the real journey was just beginning. Success hadn't been the destination, it was simply another path with its own challenges and choices. Her phone vibrated in her clutch. A text from Elijah: "Whatever you're feeling right now, it's okay. Art isn't about arrivals, it's about the journey." Mira smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Somehow he knew exactly what she needed to hear. In that moment, surrounded by her work and yet standing at another crossroads, Mira Chen, once a struggling artist who refused a bribe, now a successful artist refusing to be defined by success, made another choice: to remain true to herself, whatever that might mean. To create from a place of honesty, whatever form that might take. To use her platform to help others find their voice. She texted back, "I think I'm ready for the next chapter." His response came immediately: "I can't wait to see what you create." Mira slipped her phone away and rejoined her exhibition, ready to face her success with the same integrity that had earned it. One choice, one canvas, one day at a time. Outside the gallery windows, New York City sparkled with a million lights, each one a possibility, each one a path forward. The struggling artist who had refused a bribe had become so much more than just a millionaire. She had become herself.